Welcome back, everybody. You know we love to do deep dives here, and today we're doing something a little different.
Ooh, different how? I'm intrigued.
Well, we're exploring a sermon, but not just any sermon. This one was delivered in Malayalam.
Okay, now I'm really interested. Malayalam, that's a South Indian language, right?
That's right. It might seem, I don't know, a little unusual.
Yeah.
But trust me, there's some real wisdom tucked away in this sermon. Wisdom that can speak to all of us.
I mean, you've piqued my curiosity for sure. You know, I always say, even across languages and cultures, we find those shared human experiences, those universal truths that connect us all.
Exactly. So ready to jump in?
Let's dive in.
Okay. To set the scene, this sermon was delivered on New Year's Day, 2025. And, well, like many New Year's sermons, it focused on themes of faith, family, the whole reflecting on the year ahead thing.
Yeah.
But what really stood out to me was how the preacher used the story of Moses and Aaron
Uh-huh.
to illustrate the importance of family.
Oh, interesting. I'm listening.
Yeah, he didn't just talk about them as individuals, these big biblical figures.
Right.
He emphasized their relationship as brothers
Okay.
and how their family actually played a role in God's plan. It's like even these towering figures of faith, right? They needed a support system.
Absolutely. Everyone needs that.
Right. He even talked about how Aaron's staff,
Hmm?
now, for those who might not know, his staff was a symbol of his authority and connection to God, right?
Yeah.
That staff was placed in the Ark of the Covenant.
Oh, wow. The Ark of the Covenant. That held the Ten Commandments, right?
Yeah. Super important symbol for the Israelites.
Hugely important.
And placing Aaron's staff inside. Well, it really showed how crucial his role was, how his family's legacy was like intertwined with the story of their faith.
Right. Like their family was woven right into the fabric of it all.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
About.
The impact our families have on our own faith journeys.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, think about it.
The preacher even shared his own story about his father's conversion to Christianity and how his whole church has this vision for nurturing new generations in faith.
Yep.
Bringing the young folks along in the journey.
Passing the torch.
It felt so personal.
Absolutely. Like he was weaving his own family history into these larger biblical narratives.
Yes.
It's like he was saying, look, we all have a part to play in this story, and our families are a big part of that too.
Mm-hmm.
It made me think about my own family, how they shaped my beliefs.
Oh, me too. Even in small ways. Like maybe we don't realize it at the time, but it all adds up.
Totally.
It's like, are we carrying something forward from previous generations, and what are we going to pass on to the next?
Yeah. What will our legacy be? Deep stuff.
Definitely food for thought, especially, as we're starting a new year. Always a good time for reflection.
For sure. Speaking of new beginnings, another theme that really stood out to me was the idea of overcoming past challenges. The preacher used this image, this powerful image of the Israelites' journey through Mara.
Oh, yeah. Where they came across that bitter water,
Oh,
which Moses miraculously made sweet.
and that's a good story.
It's such a striking metaphor, though, don't you think, for how faith can help us overcome those difficult times.
It is. Like we all have our own bitter waters in life, right? Things we're struggling with, past hurts, anxieties about the future.
Yeah, the things we carry.
And the preacher's message was that even in the midst of all that difficulty,
Yeah.
there's still hope for transformation.
I love that. It's not about erasing the past, it's about moving forward.
Exactly. Faith can be that source of sweetness, that power that helps us turn something bitter into something life-giving.
Totally. And you know what really blew me away?
What's that?
He brought up Miriam, Moses' sister. I mean, she was over 90 years old.
Wow.
And she was dancing joyfully after they crossed the Red Sea. Can you imagine?
90 years old.
Even at that age, her faith was so strong, and she was celebrating with everything she had.
That's incredible. It just shows you the power of faith to inspire and bring joy. It really doesn't diminish with age.
It really doesn't. But here's the
Yeah.
thing.
What's that?
The preacher points out that these same people who were rejoicing, dancing around, feeling amazing,
Uh-huh.
they started grumbling and doubting soon after when they faced new difficulties.
Oh, man. Isn't that just like us, though?
So true. We forget the miracles we've experienced, and we just get bogged down by the next challenge.
Yep. Human nature, I guess.
It's like we forget how far we've come and how much we've already overcome.
It's so easy to lose sight of that.
The preacher didn't stop there, though.
Oh.
He went on to talk about this idea of surrendering to God's will and It gets really interesting, but I think we should probably save that for part two.
Okay, yeah, I think you're right. We've covered a lot of ground already.
We'll be back soon to unpack the rest of this amazing sermon.
Can't wait.
All right, so we're back.
Back at it.
And we left off talking about this idea of surrendering to God's will
Right, right.
and how it can be a real challenge, even for people of faith.
Definitely. I mean, it's a fascinating concept, isn't it? Surrendering to God's will. The preacher used this really vivid analogy to illustrate the idea. He's like, picture this. You're standing between, on one side, you've got all the world's good things, and on the other side, you've got God.
Yeah, I remember that. He was saying that so often we've got our backs turned to God. We're chasing after what we think will make us happy.
Right. Whether it's success or possessions or even just like comfort and security.
Yeah, those basic human needs.
He wasn't saying those things are bad in themselves, but
Yeah.
when they become our primary focus,
Uh-huh.
we miss out on the true fulfillment that comes from aligning ourselves with God's will. It's like we're looking in the wrong direction,
I see what you mean.
seeking satisfaction in things that will ultimately leave us empty.
I think what I found really compelling was that the preacher, he acknowledged this turning towards God. He was like, it's not always easy.
It's not a walk in the park.
No. And he even shared his own experience of having to climb down and back up in life.
What do you mean by that?
Facing setbacks, having to reevaluate his priorities, it wasn't always a straight path for him.
Oh, that's so important to hear. It makes it so much more relatable. It's like, here's this preacher, right? Someone we might assume, oh, he's got it all figured out.
Yeah.
He's admitting that he struggled too,
Yeah.
that he's had to let go of his own plans and trust in God's guidance even when it was hard.
Yeah. Made me think about times in my own life when I've just clung to control, even when things were clearly not working out.
You know, it makes you wonder, are we sometimes so focused on what we want that we miss out on the blessings that might come from surrendering to something, well, bigger than ourselves?
That's a question we all have to wrestle with.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
The preacher shared this anecdote about the famous preacher Campbell Morgan. Do you know him?
I heard the name.
Apparently, Morgan once challenged a pastor who had been serving his congregation for 40 years.
Wow, 40 years.
And he asked him, point blank, have you truly surrendered everything to God?
That's intense.
It is.
Yeah.
I know, right? It's like, on the surface, this pastor, he dedicated his whole life to serving God.
Yeah, 40 years.
But Morgan's point was, true surrender, it goes beyond those outward actions.
Deeper than that.
It's about giving God control over our inner selves, our desires, ambitions, the whole shebang.
It's a whole other level of commitment.
It is. It's not just about doing the right things. It's
Yes.
about aligning our hearts and minds.
It's like God's will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I think this whole idea of surrendering our ego,
Yeah.
our need to be in control,
Yeah.
it ties in really beautifully with the sermon's focus on forgiveness.
Oh, that's a good point.
Because the preacher reminded us, look, we're all human.
Right.
Make mistakes.
Me mess up.
And we need God's grace.
Every one of us.
Absolutely. And he spent quite a bit of time talking about this power of forgiveness,
Right.
using the story of Peter as a key example.
Peter, one of Jesus's closest disciples.
Yeah. The one who denied even knowing Jesus.
Not once, but 3 times.
Yeah. Talk about a mistake.
Hmm.
But he was forgiven, and he went on to become this bold preacher.
Amazing transformation.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that our past mistakes don't have to define us.
We can move forward.
We can. Think about it. If Peter had stayed trapped in that guilt and shame, he might never have fulfilled his potential.
It would have eaten him alive.
But because he accepted God's forgiveness, he was able to move forward.
And embrace a new purpose.
Exactly. So it makes you think, doesn't it?
About.
Are there areas in your own life where you might be, I don't know, holding on to past regrets, mistakes?
Yeah. Stuff we just can't seem to let go of.
Are those things preventing you from fully embracing who you are?
And what you're capable of.
That's such a good question to consider.
It is.
And I think the preacher's message was that when we cling to that guilt and shame,
Yeah.
we're essentially refusing to accept God's forgiveness.
Right. We're saying we know better than God.
And that can keep us stuck in the past.
We deserve to be punished.
Exactly.
Held back by those past actions.
And that prevents us from experiencing the freedom, the transformation that comes with forgiveness.
So we're actually building walls around ourselves.
Instead of opening up to the possibility of a new beginning.
Wow, that's powerful.
Isn't it? And I'm starting to see how all these themes, they're all interconnected.
Family, surrender, forgiveness.
It all points back to this idea of letting go of our own limited perspective and trusting in something bigger than ourselves.
Trusting in God.
And you know what I loved?
Mm.
The preacher wasn't just talking about abstract concepts.
No.
He wove in those personal stories, examples that really brought the message to life.
Like when he talked about his own experience praying for his father's conversion to Christianity.
Oh, yes. That was such a great story. He fasted and prayed for 7 days.
Oh, wow. 7 days.
Totally focused on that one desire. And then on the seventh day, as he was getting ready for church, his father surprised him by asking to go along.
You can't make this stuff up.
It's like a real-life example of how faith can move mountains.
It's amazing. It makes you realize faith isn't just some intellectual exercise.
No.
It can have a real impact on our lives.
And the lives of those around us.
Absolutely. I think that's what makes this sermon so compelling, even though it was delivered in another language.
Totally. It speaks to those universal human experiences, longing, struggle, and hope.
It really does, and it makes me wonder, what other hidden gems might be out there just waiting to be discovered in cultures and languages different from our own.
It's exciting to think about. There's so much to learn from exploring different perspectives, different faith traditions.
Absolutely. We should do more of these deep dives into different cultures.
I agree. But maybe before we get too carried away, we should take a moment to gather our thoughts.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
And there's still so much to unpack. We'll be right back to wrap up our deep dive into this remarkable sermon. All right, we're back. Ready to finish unpacking this incredible sermon.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about everything we talked about in the last part.
Me too, me too. And it's amazing how much we can still learn, right? Even from a message that was delivered in another language, another culture.
It really does speak to the power of those universal themes, doesn't it?
Yep.
Faith, family, forgiveness, things that resonate with people all over the world.
Totally. And as we've been talking, I keep coming back to this idea of surrendering to God's will.
Yeah.
It's something the preacher emphasized throughout the sermon, and it's something that really challenges me.
Me too. It's easy to say those words, I surrender to God's will, but actually doing it, letting go of our own desires and plans, especially when things are tough or uncertain or...
Right. It's like we want God to be in control, but only if it's what we want.
Yeah, like on our terms.
The preacher talked about how we often focus on sacrificing things like our time or possessions, but true surrender, it's about giving God control over our very selves.
Oh.
Our hearts, our minds, our egos.
That's a whole other level.
That's where it gets really tough, isn't it?
Letting go of that ego, that need to be in control, and trusting that God has a better plan, even if we can't see it.
Right. But I think the preacher was also offering a message of hope.
Okay.
Because when we do surrender, when we surrender to God's will, we open ourselves up, It's possibilities, blessings, things we might never have imagined.
I like that. It's like opening a door.
Like that story he shared about his father's conversion. He surrendered that desire to God, and it was fulfilled in a way he never expected.
Wow, yeah. That's powerful. It's a beautiful example of how faith and surrender work together.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
About deed.
The new year. We make resolutions, plans, we try to control things.
Yeah.
But what if instead of clinging so tightly to our agendas, we approach this new year with a sense of surrender, a willingness to let God lead the way?
I love that idea.
Yeah.
It's not about being passive or giving up on our goals. It's about being open to a different path, one we maybe didn't see at first.
And who knows, maybe that path will lead us to something even greater than we imagined.
It reminds me that, we don't have to have it all figured out.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the beauty of faith, the not knowing, the trusting that even when things are uncertain...
We're not alone.
Exactly.
The preacher shared so many personal stories, about his own struggles, moments of doubt.
He did.
He wasn't afraid to be vulnerable. And I think that made his message even more impactful.
Definitely more authentic.
He wasn't just preaching at us.
Yeah.
He was sharing his own journey of faith.
Which had its ups and downs, just like everyone else.
Yeah. Listening to this sermon has really inspired me to approach this year with a different perspective.
In what way?
To focus less on controlling outcomes, more on cultivating that spirit of surrender and trust.
I think that's a beautiful goal.
I think so too. And, maybe that's one of the biggest takeaways from all this.
From this deep dive, you mean?
Yeah. That even though this sermon, it was delivered in another language, in another part of the world.
Right.
Its message about faith, family, forgiveness, and surrender. It speaks to something universal.
Within all of us.
It reminds us that we're all connected, that we're on this journey together. And no matter what challenges we face,
There's hope
there's grace
available to us.
if we're just open to receiving it.
Thanks for joining us on this unique deep dive. I hope you found it insightful and maybe, I don't know, even a little bit inspiring.
As you start this new year,
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep the conversation going.
we'll see you all next time.